The silence in the apartment after Chloe left for her weekend conference was a physical presence. It wasn't an empty silence, but a thick, expectant one, like the held breath before a curtain rises. We'd fought before she left, not a screaming match, Chloe didn't scream, but a cold, precise dissection of my failings, my lack of ambition trajectory, my complacency in my IT support job, my unwillingness to engage with her family's social world. The fight had ended with her sighing, zipping her suitcase with a definitive zip, and saying, "We'll talk when I'm back, Mark. I need you to think about what you're bringing to this partnership." The word partnership had felt like a business evaluation. I'd stood in the doorway of our tastefully minimalist apartment, watching the elevator doors swallow her, feeling like a piece of furniture she'd decided didn't quite fit the aesthetic. That was 2 days ago. Since then, the silence had been my companion. I'd gone to work, fixed people's printer jams and password resets, and come home to the curated beige stillness. I'd been thinking, just as she'd asked, and what I'd thought was that I was tired. Tired of walking on the eggshells of her expectations. Tired of translating her passive-aggressive sighs. Tired of feeling like a perpetual guest in a life I was supposed to be building with her. My phone, face down on the coffee table, buzzed. I flinched. Probably Chloe, checking in with a text that would be equal parts perfunctory and laden with unspoken critique. But the screen showed an unfamiliar number with a local area code. "Hello? Mark? Mark, it's Diana, Chloe's mother." The voice was warm, melodic, a contrast to the chill in my own apartment. Diana Sterling. I'd met her a handful of times at stiff, formal dinners at the Sterling family home. She was a handsome woman in her late 50s, always impeccably dressed, with Chloe's same penetrating blue eyes. But where Chloe's were like ice chips, Diana's had always seemed warmer, kinder. "Diana, hi. Is everything okay?" My mind leapt to accidents, disasters. "Everything's fine, dear. I'm sorry to call you out of the blue like this." A soft, musical laugh. "I'm actually calling because Chloe isn't home. I know she's away." This was unusual. Diana and I had never spoken directly, without Chloe as an intermediary. Our conversations had been limited to polite exchanges about the weather or the food. Yes, she's at a conference in Chicago." "I know, she told me." A pause. "Mark, I'm calling because I'd like to see you, to talk. Would you be free to come over for a drink this evening?" The request was so unexpected it short-circuited my social anxiety. "Tonight? To your house?" "Yes, I know it's short notice, and I wouldn't ask if it weren't important. There are some things, well, I'd rather discuss them in person, and," her voice dropped, taking on a confidential tone, "I think it's better if Chloe isn't here for this conversation. For now." For now. The words ignited a tiny hopeful spark in my chest. This wasn't a summons to be berated. This was an ally reaching out. Someone who saw the tension, who maybe, just maybe, saw me. "Of course," I heard myself say, the words rushing out. "I can be there. What time?" 7 would be lovely. And Mark, thank you for being open to this. It means a great deal to me." She hung up. I stared at the phone. Diana Sterling wanted to talk to me, alone, about things Chloe shouldn't hear. The oppressive silence of the apartment transformed. Now it felt like the quiet backstage before a performance that could change everything. I showered, shaved with more care than I had in weeks, and put on the one nice sweater I owned that Chloe hadn't subtly criticized, a navy cashmere V-neck she'd given me for my birthday last year. As I drove through the twilight towards the exclusive tree-laned streets of Glenhaven, the Sterling family enclave, my mind raced with possibilities. Was Diana going to give me advice? Warn me about something? Offer some maternal insight into her daughter? The fact that she'd chosen to call me, that she saw me as someone worth confiding in, worth trusting, it felt like a lifeline thrown into the choppy sea of my relationship. The Sterling house wasn't a house, it was an estate, a sprawling Georgian revival masterpiece of red brick and white columns, set back behind a semicircle of manicured gravel. I'd always felt like a trespasser here, a delivery boy who'd wandered into a museum. But tonight, as I parked my sensible Honda behind a silent fountain, I felt a different charge. I was here by invitation, a secret invitation. Diana herself opened the massive oak door. She was dressed down for her, dark silk trousers and a cream turtleneck, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger, softer than I remembered. "Mark, you came." Her smile was genuine, reaching her eyes. She stepped forward and did something she'd never done before. She kissed me on the cheek. The scent of her perfume, something expensive and floral like gardenias after rain, enveloped me. Come in, it's so good to see you." She led me not into the formal, cavernous living room where we usually gathered, but into a smaller, cozy library. A fire crackled in a marble fireplace. 2 deep leather armchairs were arranged before it, a low table between them holding a crystal decanter of amber liquid and 2 glasses. "Sherry?" she asked, already pouring. "Or something stronger? I find a good cognac helps with difficult conversations." "Sherry is fine, thank you." I took the glass, my fingers brushing hers. The contact was electric. She settled into the chair opposite me, tucking her legs beneath her, a gesture of surprising casualness. She sipped her drink, watching me over the rim. "You look well, Mark. A little tired, perhaps." The observation, so gentle, so seen, undid me. "It's been a long week." "I imagine it has." She set her glass down. "Chloe told me about your discussion before she left." So that was it. She knew. Embarrassment heated my face. "I'm sorry, Diana. I didn't mean for any of that to—" She held up a hand. "Please, don't apologize. If anyone should apologize, it's me." She leaned forward, her expression earnest. "I called you here because I've watched you, Mark. For 2 years, I've watched you try so hard to fit into my daughter's world, to be what she wants. And I've watched her, well, let's just say she hasn't made it easy. She gets that from her father, a certain rigidity, a need to control the narrative." Hearing my private struggles articulated by someone else, by her mother, was both terrifying and validating. It was the acknowledgement I'd been starving for. "She wants the best," I said lamely, falling back on the party line. "She wants a projection," she corrected, her voice still kind but firm. "She wants a man on her arm who checks certain boxes, career, pedigree, social fluency, and in her determination to sculpt you into that man, she's completely missing the man you actually are." Her blue eyes held mine. "You're kind, Mark, patient. You have a quiet steadiness about you. You listen, you see people. Those are rare qualities, precious qualities. And Chloe, in her frantic climb, is treating them like liabilities." Tears, stupid and unbidden, pricked at the corners of my eyes. I looked down into my sherry. No one had ever described me that way. Chloe's assessments were always about potential, about lack. Diana was speaking about presence, about value. "I love her," I whispered, the confession torn from me. "I know you do," Diana said, her voice brimming with sympathy. "And that's what makes this so tragic, because I'm not sure she knows how to love you back, not the way you deserve." She paused, letting the crackle of the fire fill the space. "My marriage to Robert was a lot like what Chloe is trying to build with you, a strategic alliance. He provided status, I provided the social grace and the family name. Love was incidental, a bonus if it appeared, but not required. I don't want that for my daughter, and I certainly don't want it for you." This was more than I had ever dared to hope for. This was a co-conspirator, a guide, the mother I'd never had, seeing me, valuing me, wanting to protect me from the very family she came from. What should I do? The question was a plea. She reached across the space between our chairs and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was cool, her touch firm. "You need to decide what you want, Mark, not what Chloe wants for you, what you want. And you need to find your voice. When she comes back, you need to tell her, not with anger, but with clarity. Tell her what you need to feel loved, to feel respected. And if she can't or won't give you that," she squeezed my hand, "then you have a very difficult choice to make. And you should know you wouldn't be making it alone." You wouldn't be making it alone. The words were a balm, a shield. She was off. The hours between leaving the Sterling mansion and Chloe's return were a form of psychological torture my own mind administered. I paced the beige confines of our apartment, a caged animal rehearsing arguments that sounded more pathetic with each repetition. She called me. She manipulated me. She set a trap. The words, true as they were, felt flimsy against the imposing granite reality of Diana Sterling. Who was I? A mid-level IT guy with a fading sweater. Who was she? An institution. I thought about calling Chloe preemptively, but what would I say? Your mother is a psychological terrorist who pretended to be my friend to prove I'm disloyal? It sounded insane. It felt insane. The gaslighting was so complete it had worked my own sense of reality. Maybe I had misinterpreted Diana's kindness. Maybe my own need for validation had made me see an ally where there was none. The doubt, seeded by Diana's final clinical words, took root and thrived in the fertile soil of my insecurity. I didn't sleep. I watched the sky lighten from black to bruised purple to a sickly gray. The key in the lock at 11 a.m. was the sound of a guillotine dropping. Chloe walked in, pulling her sleek, hard-shell roller bag. She looked crisp, victorious, emanating the particular energy of a successful business trip, a mix of fatigue and amplified importance. She saw me standing in the middle of the living room, still in yesterday's clothes. Her perfectly shaped eyebrows lifted. "Mark, you look terrible. Is everything all right?" Her tone was concern, filtered through mild annoyance. Another problem to manage. "I need to talk," my voice gravelly from lack of sleep. She sighed, the sound I knew so well, the prelude to a conversation she deemed a waste of her optimized time. "Can it wait? I have a mountain of emails, and I need to shower." The conference was incredibly productive, but exhausting. She began wheeling her bag toward the bedroom. "It can't wait." The force in my voice stopped her. She turned, a flicker of real surprise on her face. I never used that tone. She studied me for a moment, then nodded once, sharp. "All right, 5 minutes." She perched on the edge of the modernist sofa, not inviting me to sit. She was in manager mode now, ready to dispatch an issue. I remained standing, feeling like a defendant before a judge. "Your mother called me, while you were away." Chloe's expression didn't change. "Okay, about what?" "She asked me to come over, to talk. She said it was important, that it was better if you weren't there." Now a reaction, a slight narrowing of the blue eyes. "Go on." I told her. I poured out the whole wretched story. The warm invitation, the intimate library, the sherry, the confessions about her father, the validation, the hand on mine, the feeling of being seen. I watched her face as I spoke. It was a mask of perfect, impassive listening. She didn't look shocked. She didn't look angry. She just absorbed. When I finished, breathless, reaching the climax of Diana's brutal reversal at the doorstep, I waited. For the outrage. For the how dare she. For the loyalty to me, her partner. Chloe was silent for a long moment. She uncrossed and recrossed her legs, a deliberate, thoughtful movement. "So," she said finally, her voice cool and analytical, "you went to my family home, alone while I was out of town, and engaged in an intimate, hours-long conversation with my mother, during which you both criticized me and our relationship?" The summary was a distortion, a reframing that put me at the center of the betrayal. "No, she called me. She manipulated the whole thing. It was a test. She said so." "A test you failed spectacularly by the sound of it." Chloe's voice was like dry ice. "You sat there, drinking my father's sherry, and listened to my mother, a woman you barely know, badmouth me. You agreed with her. You confided in her. You formed a secret pact against me. That's not what happened. She was pretending. She was lying to get a reaction." "And what was your reaction, Mark?" she asked, leaning forward slightly. "Your reaction was to believe her, to prefer her version of me, the cold, controlling, rigid version, to the reality of our life together, to eat up her flattery about your quiet steadiness, because God knows you don't get enough validation from your actual job." The barb was precise, aimed at the bruise she knew was there. I felt the ground crumbling beneath me. She was using my own words, my own confessed feelings as evidence against me. Diana's trap hadn't just been about the meeting, it had been about arming Chloe with the specific ammunition to destroy me. "She played me," I whispered, defeat seeping into my bones. "She revealed you," Chloe corrected, standing up. She began pacing, a panther in a beige cage. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for me? My mother had to stage an intervention because my own boyfriend is so insecure, so needy, that he'd fall for the oldest trick in the book? She was trying to protect me, Mark, from you, from your emotional neediness, your lack of discernment." Each word was a lash. Needy, insecure, lack of discernment. The very vulnerabilities Diana had pretended to soothe were now the charges against me. "So you believe her," I said, the fight gone from me. "You believe I'm this pathetic, disloyal fool who would conspire with your mother behind your back." Chloe stopped pacing and looked at me. For a second I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not doubt, but a cold, calculating satisfaction. "You believe the facts. You went, you talked, you shared private grievances about our relationship with my mother. You allowed her to drive a wedge. The why is irrelevant. The action is what matters." It was a corporate HR dismissal. "The underlying intent is not our concern. The policy violation is clear." "What happens now?" I asked, my voice hollow. She sighed, the sound now of weary resolution. "I think we need a break, a real one. I cannot be with a man my mother feels she needs to protect me from. I cannot be with a man who is so easily swayed, so gullible." She walked to the bedroom door. "I'll be in touch," she said, and walked out. The silence that followed was worse than before. It was the silence of a verdict. I was guilty of neediness, of disloyalty, of failing a test I never knew I was taking. The next 3 days were a descent into a private hell. I called in sick to work. I barely ate. I stared at the walls, replaying both conversations on a loop, Diana's honeyed lies and Chloe's icy indictment. The two narratives twisted around each other, a double helix of my own damnation. I was the villain in both stories. The 4th day, my phone buzzed. Not Chloe, an unknown number, but this time the area code was for the Sterling family's summer home in the Hamptons. Hesitantly, I answered. "Hello?" "Mark, it's Robert, Chloe's father." His voice was a baritone rumble, the voice of boards of directors and closing deals. I'd exchanged maybe 50 words with him in 2 years. He'd always looked at me as one might look at a moderately interesting insect that had landed on his financial newspaper. "Robert, hi. I'll be brief, son. Diana has informed me of the situation. I've spoken with Chloe." He paused. "This is a mess, son. A needless, embarrassing mess." Son, the word, so paternal, so utterly condescending, made my skin crawl. "Your emotional entanglement with my wife," he continued, choosing his words with the care of a diplomat discussing a rogue state, "however misinterpreted, has created significant turmoil. Chloe is devastated. Her focus is fractured. This is unacceptable. She is on the cusp of a promotion that requires absolute clarity and commitment." I couldn't speak. He was talking about it like a hostile takeover attempt. "We need this resolved, cleanly, for the good of the family and for Chloe's future." Another pause. "I'm prepared to make you an offer." An offer? My mind, sluggish with grief and confusion, struggled to keep up. "A severance package, if you will," Robert said, his voice dropping into a confidential, deal-making register. "You will end your relationship with Chloe. amicably. You will cite irreconcilable differences, your own need to find yourself, whatever benign narrative you prefer. You will not mention Diana. You will not speak of this experiment to anyone. In return, I will facilitate a transfer for you to the West Coast office of your current firm, a fresh start, a promotion to a junior systems analyst role, and a one-time financial consideration of $50,000 to assist with relocation and transition. I sat down heavily on the sofa, the phone glued to my ear. He was buying me off. He was putting a price on my silence, on my disappearance. The relationship was being liquidated. You're bribing me to go away? The incredulity gave me a fleeting moment of clarity. I'm offering a mutually beneficial solution to a problem that benefits no one, he corrected, irritation seeping into his tone. Mark, be realistic. What future do you have here? With Chloe? After this? The trust is broken. You'll always be the man who was manipulated by her mother. Every family dinner, every holiday. The 24-hour ultimatum was a psychic vice, tightening with each passing minute. Robert Sterling's voice echoed in the silence of the apartment, a dry, relentless narrator detailing my options, dignified exile or professional annihilation. He'd framed it as a choice, but it was a double bind. Accept the bribe and become a paid-off coward. Refuse it and become a publicly ruined fool. Either way, I lost. The only variable was the manner of my defeat. I couldn't stay in the apartment. The beige walls felt like they were leaching the color from my soul. I drove aimlessly, the city a blur of indifferent motion. I ended up at the park where Chloe and I had our first real date, a picnic she'd meticulously planned, down to the artisanal cheese and the specific mineral water. I'd found it charmingly intense at the time. Now I saw the early blueprints of control. My phone buzzed. Not Robert, not Chloe. A text from an unknown number. Unknown. Mark, it's Diana. We need to talk. Please, not on the phone. The cafe on Elm and 5th. 30 minutes. I'll be in the back booth. My first instinct was a surge of white-hot fury. How dare she? After the surgical cruelty on her doorstep, after setting this entire nightmare in motion, she wanted to talk? But beneath the fury was a desperate, pathetic curiosity. Why? What could she possibly have to say? Another layer of manipulation? A revision to the test results? Or maybe a sliver of remorse, a flicker of the maternal warmth that had felt so real? The part of me that was still reeling, still aching for the validation she'd dangled, was dangerously susceptible to that hope. It was a terrible idea. Sasha, if she were my friend and not just a hypothetical voice of reason in my head, would have screamed at me to block the number and change my locks. But I wasn't thinking like a rational person. I was a drowning man, and Diana's text was a shape in the water. It might be a life preserver, it might be a shark. I had to know. The cafe was the kind of place Diana would deem quaint and secretly find unsanitary. It smelled of burnt coffee and damp wool. She was in the back booth, as promised, partially hidden by a large fern. She wore large sunglasses and a headscarf, a pathetic attempt at a disguise that only made her look more conspicuous. She was nervously shredding a paper napkin. I slid into the booth opposite her. I didn't speak. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were puffy, red-rimmed. The impeccable mask was cracked. "Mark," she breathed, her voice trembling. "Thank you for coming. I know you have no reason to ever want to see me again." "You're right," I said flatly. "So why am I here?" A tear escaped and tracked through her powder. It looked genuine, but then so had everything else. "I had to see you, to try to explain. What happened, it got away from me, from us. Robert, he has his own way of handling things." "You mean buying people off?" She flinched. "He sees it as a clean solution. He doesn't understand emotions, not like I do." She leaned forward, her hands clasped on the sticky table. "The test, it was wrong. I see that now. It was a moment of panic. Chloe has been so distant from me, so critical. She idolizes her father, his cold logic. I felt her slipping away, and then I saw how she was with you, the constant criticism, the dissatisfaction. It mirrored how she is with me. I thought if I could show her that you were vulnerable too, that you needed reassurance just like I did, it would create a bond between us, a shared understanding. I thought we could be allies, you and I, to help her, to soften her." It was a new story, a dizzying alternative narrative where she wasn't a cruel puppeteer, but a lonely, misunderstood mother trying to connect. It was so perfectly tailored to my own loneliness, my own feeling of being on the outside of the Sterling fortress, that it was lethally persuasive. "You told her I was disloyal. You said I failed." "I had to," she whispered fiercely. "Don't you see? When I saw how quickly you opened up to me, how hungry you were for kindness, it scared me. For you. It proved how fragile your position with her really was. If I could crack you so easily, what could someone else do? Someone with worse intentions. I had to make her see the weakness, so she could either fix it or make a clean break to protect you from a lifetime of this." Her tears were flowing freely now. I did it badly. I'm so sorry. I'm not as strong as Robert. I let his pressure, his fix-it mentality twist my intentions into that horrible performance on the doorstep. I was trying to protect us both, and I ended up destroying everything. She was offering me a share of the victimhood. We were both casualties of Robert's cold empire and Chloe's impossible standards. It was a seductive, unifying theory. It made the world make sense again. There wasn't a monster. There was just a family tragedy, with Diana and me as the star-crossed allies caught in the middle. Robert offered me money to disappear, I said, testing her. Her face crumpled in fresh anguish. I know. He told me. It's his only language. Please, Mark, don't take it. Don't let him win. If you take that money and run, it proves his worldview, that everything and everyone has a price. It proves Chloe right about your lack of substance. She reached across the table, her manicured fingers hovering near my hand but not touching it. Stay. Fight. Not for Chloe. Not anymore. For yourself. Show them they can't just erase a person. I'll help you. I'll talk to Chloe. I'll tell her the truth, that I manipulated you, that I was wrong. It might not fix things between you, but it will clear your name. It will force her to see the family dynamics for what they are. It was everything I wanted to hear. Vindication, an ally, a chance to reclaim my narrative from the cold, transactional hands of Robert and the judgmental gaze of Chloe. Diana was handing me a sword and asking me to stand beside her. And that's when I saw it. The flaw in the gemstone. If her goal was truly to protect me, to be my ally, why stage the test in the first place? Why not just come to me as a concerned mother and say, I see Chloe is hard on you, let's talk? Why the elaborate seduction, the false intimacy, the staged betrayal? This new story wasn't an apology, it was a pivot. The first manipulation, the test, had yielded a result that backfired on her. Chloe had turned the evidence against me, but in doing so, had also implicitly condemned Diana's meddling. Robert had stepped in with his brute force solution, sidelining her. Diana was losing control of the narrative she had authored. So she was rewriting the script, casting herself as the tragic heroine, and offering me a co-starring role in the revised production. If I took it, if I allied with her against Robert and Chloe, I would become her weapon. My fight would be her proxy war. She wasn't offering me my power back, she was recruiting me for her side of the family civil war. The double bind tightened. Option A, take Robert's money and be the bought-off coward. Option B, take Diana's deal and be the manipulated pawn in a richer, more complex game. I looked at her tear-streaked, pleading face. The performance was even better than the first one. This time she was letting me see the cracks, the vulnerability. It was a far more sophisticated lie. I need to think, I said, echoing the words I had given Robert. My voice sounded distant, even to me. Her face fell, but she nodded, a brave, wounded smile touching her lips. Of course, I've asked so much of you. Just, please don't let him buy your silence. Your voice matters, Mark. You matter. She put her sunglasses back on, dropped a $50 bill on the table for 2 untasted coffees, and slipped out of the booth, a grief-stricken ghost. I sat there for a long time, the cafe noise receding into a dull roar. The emotional whiplash was nauseating. In the span of 48 hours, I had been the valued confidant, the disloyal fool, the problem to be solved, and now the potential insurgent. My identity was being rewritten by committee, and each draft was more damaging than the last. I couldn't trust my own judgment. Diana had proven that. So I did the only thing I could think of that felt remotely like taking action. I went to a cheap office supply store and bought a single, simple thing, a notary stamp and a pack of legal forms. I went home, and on my kitchen table, amidst the ghost of Chloe's perfectionism, I wrote a letter. It was not to any of them. It was to my landlord giving notice to terminate my lease on the apartment I could no longer afford alone. I signed it and had it notarized at a shipping store the next morning. It was a small, tangible act of severance. It had nothing to do with their games. It was about my reality. The reaction was not immediate. It took 3 days for the ripples to reach them. The first call was from Chloe. Her voice was no longer icy. It was sharp, bewildered. Mark, the management company just called me. You gave notice? What are you doing? I'm moving out, I said, my voice steady. You can't just make a unilateral decision like that. We need to discuss this. This is our home. It's your home, Chloe. I'm just vacating it. The clarity of Dave's metaphor gave me strength. I'm getting out of the car. Silence. The silence in my new studio was different from the silence in the apartment I'd shared with Chloe. That silence had been heavy, judgmental, expectant, full of unspoken critiques and failing metrics. This silence was empty, neutral. It was just space, waiting to be filled with whatever I chose. The smell of old carpet and takeout from the neighboring units was a far cry from Chloe's curated sense of lemon verbena and linen spray. It felt real, undesigned. For the first week, I did nothing. I slept on a mattress on the floor. I ate cereal from the box. I watched the dust motes dance in the afternoon sun that slanted through my single, unadorned window. I was an emotional burn victim, and the sterile, quiet emptiness of the studio was my gauze. I didn't think about the Sterlings. I didn't allow myself to think about them. Every time their faces or words surfaced, Chloe's icy disappointment, Diana's theatrical tears, Robert's clinical ultimatums, I mentally swatted them away. I was practicing a new discipline, irrelevance. But the world has a way of demanding accounting. My savings were dwindling. The professional annihilation Robert had promised began to materialize with quiet efficiency. My LinkedIn profile became a digital ghost town. Recruiters who had been warmly persistent went silent. A promising final round interview for a position I was perfect for ended with a terse form letter rejection. I knew, without proof, that Robert Sterling's influence was a subtle poison in the water table of my industry. He wasn't making loud threats. He was simply letting it be known that I was a liability. A man who couldn't manage his personal affairs was not a man to be trusted with client accounts or corporate strategy. It was the gentlest, most effective form of ruin. Dave, my brother, offered me work at the shop. "Can always use an extra pair of hands," he grunted. "You won't be good for shit at first, but you can learn." It was a lifeline thrown from the deck of a sturdy, unglamorous ship. I took it. My first day, I shredded my knuckles on a rusted bolt, stained my only decent jeans with transmission fluid, and was exhaustively, creatively cursed out by a mechanic named Gus for handing him the wrong size wrench. I went home that night, aching, stinking of gasoline and sweat, and felt a bizarre, profound sense of peace. The work was physical, its problems tangible. A bolt was stuck. You applied heat, you applied force, you swore at it, and eventually it turned. There was a direct, honest relationship between effort and outcome. No subtext, no tests. I began to rebuild my life on this new, simpler operating system. The studio accumulated a few pieces of second-hand furniture, a sturdy table, a comfortable chair that didn't match anything. I bought a cheap coffee maker that made terrible, brutal coffee. I drank it every morning, and the bitterness tasted like freedom. Then the letter arrived. It was on thick, cream-colored stationery, the address written in Chloe's precise, elegant script. No return address, but I knew. My heart, which had settled into a steady, cautious rhythm, gave a single hard thump of alarm. I left it on the table for a full day, a white rectangle of potential contamination in my clean, neutral space. Finally, curiosity, or perhaps the need for a different kind of closure, won. I opened it. "Mark, I am not writing this to reopen old wounds. I am writing because in the weeks since you left, I have been forced to confront certain uncomfortable truths. My father informed me of his financial solution. I was appalled, though I suppose I should not have been surprised. It is his way. I want you to know I had no part in it. To buy a person's silence is vulgar. My mother has been unwell. She vacillates between grandiose plans to save various causes and deep melancholic spells where she claims no one understands her. She speaks of you often, casting you alternately as the one who got away from her mentorship or a betrayer of her confidence. Her narratives are inconsistent. It is draining. This has led me to re-examine the events of that weekend. I have replayed our argument, her intervention, your reaction, countless times. My initial conclusion, that you had failed a fundamental test of character, was rooted in a paradigm I now question. The paradigm was my mother's. I see now that her test was not a measure of your loyalty to me, it was a performance designed to elicit a specific drama. You were a prop, and I, in my haste to uphold an ideal of strength and discernment she had always insisted upon, played my assigned role, the righteous judge. I judged you for being vulnerable to the very vulnerability she expertly cultivates. I condemned you for seeking connection where she had deliberately engineered a void. This was not justice, it was collusion. I do not say this to excuse your actions. Opening your heart to my mother, of all people, demonstrated a profound and tragic naivete. But I must acknowledge that the game was rigged, and I was a participant, not an arbiter. I do not expect a response. I do not seek reconciliation. What existed between us, I believe, is irreparably fractured. But fracture is not erasure. I am trying to learn the difference. I hope you are well. Chloe. I read it 5 times. The calm, analytical tone was pure Chloe. There was no apology, not in the emotional sense. It was a forensic report on an emotional crime scene, with revised conclusions. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was stating a corrected finding of fact. I was a participant, not an arbiter. For Chloe, that was a seismic admission. The letter did not bring warmth. It did not spark hope. Instead, it brought a final, chilling clarity. She was still analyzing, still evaluating, just from a new, slightly more self-aware vantage point. She had swapped one paradigm for another, but she was still living inside a paradigm. The letter itself was an act of superior judgment, the judgment that she had been judgmental. And yet, there was a strange respect in it. She was treating me, finally, as an independent variable in the equation, not a constant to be solved for. She was acknowledging the field, even as she withdrew from it. I did not write back. Any response would be sucked back into the Sterling vortex of analysis and strategy. My silence was my final statement. A month passed. Winter tightened its grip on the city. I was getting better at the shop. I could do an oil change without supervision. Gus still cursed at me, but now it was more out of habit than genuine outrage. Dave would sometimes nod at a job I'd finished, a gesture that felt like a presidential medal. I was at the shop late one evening finishing up a brake job when a sleek black luxury sedan pulled up to the bay doors, utterly alien amidst the graveyard of pickups and compacts. The driver's door opened and Robert Sterling emerged. He looked out of place, a sharp, gray-suited sculpture against the backdrop of grime and tool chests. He didn't flinch at the smell or the clutter. His eyes scanned the space and found me, lying on a creeper under a Honda Civic. I slid out and stood up, wiping my hands on a rag. We looked at each other across the concrete floor, two soldiers from different wars. "Mark," he said, his voice the same dry, uninflected instrument. "Robert, I didn't ask how he found me. A man like Robert Sterling could find anyone." "I'll be brief. Chloe is moving to London, a position with our UK office. She leaves next week." I nodded. It made sense, a strategic retreat to a new theater of operations. "My wife is entering a private residential facility for treatment. The diagnosis is a complex one, but the core issue is a chronic manipulative personality disorder exacerbated by profound ennui." He said it as if reading a stock report. "The facility is expensive and discreet." I said nothing. I waited for the ask, the threat, the final piece of business. He looked around the shop again, his gaze lingering on a wall of worn sockets, on Gus yelling at a radiator. "You chose this," he stated, not with disgust, but with a genuine clinical curiosity. I did. "The money offer is permanently withdrawn. You pose no further narrative risk. My daughter has recalibrated. My wife is contained. You are effectively neutralized as a variable." He reached into his inner breast pocket. I tensed, but he pulled out a single, crisp business card. It was blank except for a single handwritten email address. "This is a contact, a headhunter. He specializes in placements for individuals whose careers have been disrupted by non-professional circumstances. He understands discretion. He owes me a favor." He held out the card. I stared at it. This wasn't help, it was asset reallocation. He saw a tool that had proven slightly more resilient than he anticipated, and he was placing it in a drawer where it might be useful later. Or he was simply tidying up the last loose end, ensuring I wouldn't become a desperate, vengeful problem later by giving me a path back into the system he understood. It was the diner coffee was no better than my own, but it was hot and refilled without judgment by a waitress named Dot, who called everyone Hun and had a tattoo of a sparrow on her wrist. I sat in a cracked vinyl booth, the neon light painting the Formica table pink, and let the last of the adrenaline from Robert's visit bleed away. The business card felt like a ghost in my pocket, but the weight of it was already fading. It was a data point, not a destiny. I never emailed the headhunter. A week after Robert's visit, I tore the card into neat quarters and dropped it into a storm drain on my walk to work. It wasn't an act of defiance. It was hygiene. Sterling systems required Sterling logic, and I was done trying to think in a language that reduced people to variables. I watched the pieces swirl and vanish in the dark water, a tiny, private ceremony of disconnection. The work at Dave's shop became more than a job. It became a grammar. I learned the language of engines, the syntax of torque, the vocabulary of compression. My hands, once only proficient with keyboards and the delicate stemware Chloe preferred, grew calloused and permanently etched with faint lines of grease. The cuts and bruises were receipts, proof of purchase in a tangible world. Gus stopped cursing at me and started cursing near me, which was, I learned, his version of a welcome wagon. Chloe's departure for London was a silent earthquake I felt only through the sudden, absolute cessation of any potential signal. The frequency on which her judgment or potential reappearance had faintly hummed in the back of my mind went dead. It was a quiet relief, like the cessation of a low-grade headache I'd forgotten was there. Diana's treatment, according to a single, stark article I stumbled upon in a business section 6 months later, was at a serene, forested facility in Switzerland. The article mentioned a strategic withdrawal from public life to focus on philanthropic curation. Robert's hand was evident in the phrasing. She was contained, as he'd said, a masterpiece in a climate-controlled vault. My new life accreted slowly, particle by particle. I moved from the studio to a small one-bedroom apartment above a bakery. The morning smell of baking bread was a daily, uncomplicated kindness. I bought a decent coffee maker. I hung a framed poster of a vintage Mustang, not because I loved Mustangs, but because I liked the clean lines of its engine in the diagram. A year after the diner, Dot the waitress slipped me her number on my check. "You look like you could use a decent meal that ain't on a greasy plate, hun," she'd said. Dot was 10 years older than me, sharp-witted, fiercely loyal, and had zero patience for drama. Our first date was at a noisy Italian place where she knew the owner. She told me about her ex-husband, a charming dreamer who'd left her with debt and a distrust of grand gestures. I told her, in broad, simple strokes, about a family who treated emotions like chess pieces. She listened, nodded, and said, "Sounds like a bunch of assholes with too much time on their hands." She didn't psychoanalyze, she categorized. It was refreshing. With Dot, there were no tests. There were only clear, stated preferences. She liked action movies, hated cilantro, and believed in saying exactly what was on her mind. It was sometimes jarring, often hilarious, and always, always real. We built something slow and sturdy. It was not a fairy tale. It was a sensible, well-constructed shed built to weather storms. 2 years on, Dave made me shop foreman. "You're not the best mechanic I got," he said gruffly, "but you're the only one who talks to the customers without making them feel stupid, and you don't steal from the till." It was the highest praise I'd ever received. The past didn't vanish. Sometimes a certain slant of afternoon light, or the sound of a woman's measured, cultured voice on a podcast would send a shiver of old anxiety through me, a phantom limb of emotional hypervigilance. Sometimes, in moments of quiet with Dot, I'd feel a pang of something like grief, not for Chloe, but for the man I'd been, so desperate for validation that he'd mistaken a carefully laid trap for a sanctuary. One afternoon, I was under the hood of a particularly stubborn old truck, wrestling with a corroded fuel line. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. It buzzed again, insistent. Finally, exasperated, I wiped my hands and pulled it out. An unknown number, a 212 area code, Manhattan. My old heart, the one prone to leaping into paranoid narratives, gave a feeble twitch. My new heart, the one calibrated by carburetors and Dot's blunt affection, simply registered an interruption. I answered. "Mark? Mark, is that you?" The voice was female, cultured, but thinner, frailer than I remembered. It carried a faint, trembling echo. I knew who it was immediately. The world didn't tilt, the garage didn't fade. Gus was still swearing at a tire iron across the bay. "Diana," I said, my voice flat. "Oh, Mark, you recognized me. I wasn't sure you would." A delicate, practiced pause. "I have to speak quickly. They monitor my calls, you know. But I convinced Dr. Albrecht it was part of my reconciliation therapy, to make amends." I said nothing. I watched a drop of oil slowly make its way down the dipstick in my hand. "I've had so much time to think, to see things clearly. What I did to you, it was the greatest mistake of my life. You were pure, you were real, and I used that beautiful reality for a parlor trick." Her voice broke, but the break felt rehearsed, a crack in a familiar vase. "I am truly, deeply sorry, not as part of therapy, as a woman, as the woman I could have been, perhaps, if I'd had someone like you in my life sooner." It was the apology I'd once ached for. Polished to a high gloss, delivered from a Swiss mountaintop. It meant less to me now than Gus's opinion on synthetic oil. "I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me, Diana. Not for my sake, but for yours, so you can be free." "Diana," I said, cutting through the soliloquy. "I am free." The silence on the other end was different. It wasn't a dramatic pause. It was the silence of a dropped line, or of genuine flustered surprise. The script didn't have a response for that. I'm glad to hear that, Mark," she finally said, the vibrancy leaching from her voice. "Truly." "Goodbye, Diana." I hung up. I stood there for a moment, the phone in my greasy hand. I felt nothing. No triumph, no anger, no pity. Just the faint, distant hum of a closed circuit. I blocked the number, then slipped the phone back in my pocket. I picked up my wrench, fitted it onto the stubborn fitting, leaned my weight into it, and felt the satisfying metallic crack of it breaking free. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with Dot. The bakery below was closed, and the smell of yeast had faded into the comfortable, lived-in scent of our apartment. I told her about the call. She snorted, stirring her chili. "Let me guess. She's found clarity, and you were the one true light or some such bullshit." "Something like that. She's lonely in her fancy prison and is fishing to see if you're still on the hook. Pathetic." Dot took a bite, then pointed her spoon at me. "You know what you should do?" "What?" "Nothing. You already did it. You hung up. That's the whole playbook right there." She smiled, a real crinkly-eyed smile. "Now eat your dinner before it gets cold." I ate. The chili was good, a little too spicy, just the way I liked it. Later, as we washed dishes, Dot's shoulder brushing against mine, I looked out the window at the quiet street below. The old trembling hope for external validation, the fear of failing secret tests, the dizzying paranoia of being a pawn in someone else's rich game, it was all gone, scoured away by honest labor, by straightforward love, by the daily, uncelebrated act of choosing my own life. The Sterlings lived in a world of narratives, of tests and performances, victories and defeats. I lived in a world of things that were broken and things that could be fixed. My hands were scarred, my life was simple, and my heart, once a confused instrument played by experts, now beat its own steady, reliable rhythm. It was the rhythm of an engine that might not be glamorous, but always started. It was the rhythm of a man who was finally, unquestionably, home.